That morning started like any other for her. She was rushing through her usual routine, checking her phone between sips of coffee and mentally listing the meetings she had to attend that day. As the CEO of a fast-growing company, her life was built on structure, deadlines, and endless decision-making. She rarely had time to slow down, much less stop at a local cafe, but that day something felt different. Maybe it was the fatigue she'd been feeling lately. Or maybe she just wanted to breathe somewhere that didn't smell like office air. She told her driver to stop by a small cafe she'd seen a few times on her way to work. It wasn't one of those modern, glassy places she usually went to for meetings. It was quiet, cozy, and smelled of freshly baked bread. She walked in, still holding her phone, barely noticing anyone around her. She ordered a cappuccino and took a seat by the window, opening her laptop right away. Her fingers moved fast on the keyboard as she typed out instructions to her assistant. She was lost in work, her eyes glued to the screen, unaware of the world around her. Then it happened. Suddenly and unexpectedly, a small hand bumped her table, and before she could react, a cup of hot chocolate toppled over, spilling all over her important documents. The liquid spread fast, staining her printed reports and soaking the corner of her laptop. She froze for a moment, staring at the mess, unable to believe it. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," a man's voice said quickly, followed by the nervous sound of a child's apology. She looked up, ready to say something sharp, but the words stuck in her throat. The little girl standing there couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. Her eyes were wide with fear, her small hands holding a napkin as if that could undo the accident. Beside her, a man in a simple gray shirt was kneeling down, trying to help clean up the spill. He looked embarrassed but calm, his voice gentle as he said to the girl, "It's okay, sweetheart. Accidents happen. Let's help her clean this up." Something about his tone stopped the CEO from reacting the way she usually would. Normally, she would have snapped, demanded compensation, or at least made her frustration known. But this man's calmness and the child's trembling lips softened her instantly. She took a deep breath and shook her head. "It's all right," she said, surprising even herself with how gentle her voice sounded. "Don't worry about it." The man looked up at her, relief in his eyes. "Thank you. I'm really sorry." She got too excited when she saw the marshmallows. The girl gave a shy, guilty smile, and the CEO couldn't help but smile back. "It's okay," she said softly. "I've made bigger messes." He laughed, a low, warm sound that seemed to ease the tension. The staff hurried over to help, offering napkins and apologies, but she waved them off. "It's fine," she repeated. "No harm done." As the man and his daughter cleaned the table, she found herself watching them quietly. The way he spoke to the child, with patience, kindness, and no trace of anger, caught her attention. There was something peaceful about it, something rare. Once the table was cleaned and the mess handled, he turned to her again. "I really appreciate your understanding." Most people wouldn't have handled it this calmly. She smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just tired," she joked, and he smiled back. Before leaving, the little girl looked at her and whispered, "I'm sorry again." "Don't worry," the CEO said, smiling warmly now. "You made my morning a bit more interesting." They left soon after, but she couldn't focus on her work anymore. She closed her laptop and stared out the window, her coffee untouched. Something about that moment lingered, the softness in that father's voice, the way the girl looked up to him, the calm energy they carried even after making a mistake. It was a small thing, but it had touched something deep inside her. The rest of the day passed in meetings, phone calls, and business reports, but her mind kept drifting back to that cafe. She couldn't explain why, but she kept thinking about the single dad and his daughter. Maybe it was the contrast between their warmth and her cold, structured world. Maybe it was the way he didn't seem rushed, even though he clearly had a lot to manage. Whatever it was, the memory stayed with her. The next morning, she found herself driving past the cafe again. She told herself it was just coincidence, but deep down she knew it wasn't. She glanced at the window, half hoping, half expecting to see that father and daughter again. But they weren't there. She sighed and continued to work, pushing the thought aside. Days passed. The company hit a major milestone and she hosted a meeting with investors. Everyone congratulated her, yet she felt strangely empty. Success didn't fill her the way it used to. She couldn't explain why, but something inside her was changing. Quietly, slowly, but definitely changing. The following week, on a cool morning, she walked into that cafe again. She wasn't planning to. Her driver was supposed to take her straight to the office, but she suddenly told him to stop there. She ordered her coffee and sat by the same window. The air was calm, the sound of soft music playing in the background. She looked around almost as if expecting someone. Then she saw them. The same father and daughter walked in, chatting and laughing. The girl spotted her first. "Daddy, it's the lady with the coffee," she whispered, pointing excitedly. The CEO smiled, waving lightly. The man looked surprised for a moment, then smiled too. He walked over to her table and said, "We meet again, hopefully without any spills this time." She laughed softly. "No hot chocolate disasters today?" "Not yet," he replied with a playful grin. His daughter giggled, clutching a small stuffed bunny. The CEO motioned for them to join her, and they did. For the first time in a long time, she felt relaxed. Talking not as a CEO, but as a person. They talked about simple things. How mornings were always rushed. How the cafe served the best muffins. How the weather had been unpredictable. He mentioned that he worked as a freelance designer and often brought his daughter there before school. When she asked about the girl's mother, he hesitated for a moment, then quietly said she had passed away a few years ago. The CEO didn't know what to say. Her heart sank and she felt a deep ache for both of them. But he didn't speak with sadness. Instead, he spoke with calm acceptance, like someone who had made peace with life's hardships. "She keeps me going," he said, glancing at his daughter. "She's my reason to smile every day." The little girl beamed at him, and the CEO found herself smiling too. Something inside her melted again. There was a beauty in their bond that no success or luxury could replace. When it was time for them to leave, she felt reluctant to say goodbye. "It was nice talking to you again," she said. "Likewise," he replied, standing up and helping his daughter with her bag. "Thank you for letting us sit with you. She really likes your company." The girl nodded quickly. "You're nice," she said, and the CEO chuckled. "Thank you, sweetie. You're pretty nice too." As they walked out, she watched them go, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: warmth. Not the kind that came from accomplishment or money, but the quiet warmth of human connection. Back at her office, she kept thinking about them. About how gentle he was, how the child's laughter seemed to fill the whole room, and how she, a woman who once prided herself on control, had completely lost herself in that small, ordinary moment. That night, when she came home, she didn't open her laptop right away. Instead, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, remembering that cafe. It wasn't love yet, not in the way movies described it, but it was something deeper. It was curiosity, warmth, and a longing for something real. The CEO, who had built walls around her heart for years, found herself smiling at the memory of a man and his daughter who had accidentally spilled hot chocolate on her files. That simple moment had done something she couldn't explain. It had reminded her that not everything valuable came from power or success. Sometimes it came from kindness, from innocence, and from people who didn't care who she was, only how she made them feel. That night, she slept peacefully for the first time in a long while, unaware that her life was quietly changing, one cafe morning at a time. The next few days passed quietly, but her thoughts weren't the same. Work kept her busy as always, yet every now and then, her mind drifted back to that cafe. She had spent years thinking only about deadlines, profits, and company goals. But lately, she found herself wondering about a single father and his little girl. She would catch herself smiling at the thought, then quickly shake her head and return to work, pretending it meant nothing. But it did mean something. Something small maybe, but real. One evening after a long day of meetings, she walked out of her office feeling tired. The city lights blurred through her car window as the driver asked where to go. Without thinking too much, she said, "Take me to the cafe." When she stepped inside, the warm smell of coffee and baked cookies welcomed her again. It felt peaceful, so different from her world of suits and schedules. She sat at the same corner table and ordered her usual cappuccino. As she waited, she wondered if she might see them again, but told herself not to expect anything. Then she heard a familiar laugh. She turned slightly and saw him walking in with his daughter. The girl was holding his hand, talking excitedly about something, her backpack bouncing as she walked. The CEO's lips curved into an involuntary smile. The father looked up, saw her, and smiled too. He waved as if greeting an old friend and walked over. "Well," he said lightly, "seems we've got the same coffee schedule again." She laughed softly. Maybe this cafe has a habit of bringing people together. He chuckled and his daughter grinned shyly, remembering her from before. The little one tugged her father's sleeve and whispered, "Can we sit with her again?" He looked at the CEO. "Mind if we join you?" "Of course not," she said quickly, genuinely glad for the company. They sat down and the easy warmth returned between them, as if no time had passed. They talked about small things at first. He told her that his daughter loved art and had started drawing everything she saw, including the cafe's cat that liked to nap near the counter. The CEO smiled, listening with interest. She shared that she used to draw too when she was a child, though life had taken her far away from hobbies like that. His daughter's eyes brightened. "You can draw?" "Not anymore," she said with a little laugh. "But maybe I can learn again if someone teaches me." The little girl smiled proudly. "I can teach you." Her father laughed, shaking his head. "She thinks she's a professional now." "She sounds like a good teacher to me," the CEO said kindly, and the child blushed. As they talked, something in her began to relax. For years she'd lived behind an invisible wall, polite, confident, always composed. But with them, she didn't feel like she had to impress anyone. The conversation flowed easily, full of small laughs and simple stories. She even forgot about the emails waiting in her phone. After some time, the little girl excused herself to look at the cat near the counter. The CEO and the father sat quietly for a moment, sipping their drinks. "You seem less stressed than the first time we met," he said with a small smile. "Maybe that's because you're not spilling hot chocolate on me this time," she teased. He laughed. "Fair enough. But honestly, you looked, well, busy back then. Like you carried the world on your shoulders." "I suppose I did," she admitted softly. "That's what happens when you run a company. Everything depends on you. Everyone expects something. There's no time to breathe." He nodded slowly. "Sounds exhausting." "It is," she said, her tone honest for once. "Sometimes I forget what normal life feels like." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe this cafe helps with that." She smiled, looking around. "Maybe it does." The little girl returned with a cookie and offered to share it. The CEO took a small piece, thanking her warmly. It was such a simple act, but it touched her heart. She wasn't used to being cared for even in small ways. People usually came to her with requests, not kindness. They talked for a while longer until it was time for them to leave. Before going, the father turned to her and said, "It was really nice running into you again." "Same here," she replied sincerely. The girl waved happily. "See you next time." The words stayed with her long after they were gone. "See you next time." She didn't know if there would be a next time, but she hoped there would. A few mornings later, she found herself at the cafe again. She didn't even pretend it was coincidence anymore. She ordered her drink and sat down, and a few minutes later, there they were again. This time they laughed when they saw her. "Okay," the father said jokingly. "I'm starting to think you live here." "Or maybe you do," she replied with a grin. Their casual meetings became a quiet routine. Sometimes they arrived first, sometimes she did. They would talk for a while before heading off to their separate days. She started to look forward to it, even planning her schedule around that morning break. One day when she walked in, she saw the little girl sitting alone at their usual table, coloring on a napkin. The father was at the counter paying for something. The CEO smiled and walked over. "What are you drawing today?" she asked gently. "It's you," the child said, showing her the napkin. The drawing was simple but sweet. A woman with a cup of coffee smiling beside a small girl and a man. Her heart melted instantly. "That's beautiful," she said, touched. "You made me look much happier than I really am." The girl frowned. "You are happy," she said firmly. "You smile when you talk to Daddy." Before the CEO could respond, the father returned, looking slightly embarrassed. "She likes to speak her mind," he said, chuckling. "It's okay," the CEO replied softly. "She's right." They shared a quiet look then, brief but full of understanding. Something gentle passed between them. Neither said anything, but both felt it. Later, as they walked out together, he offered to carry her coffee tray. She refused at first, out of habit, but then let him. It felt strange to be taken care of, even in such a small way. When they reached the door, he asked, "Do you always come here before work?" "Only lately," she said. "Before that, I barely had time for breakfast," he smiled. "I guess we both needed a change." That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, she thought about what he said. He didn't have much compared to her. No fancy car, no expensive suit, but he seemed content. He had peace, something she realized she'd been missing for years. She tried to remember the last time she'd laughed freely the way she did at the cafe. She couldn't. The memory didn't exist. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew naturally. Sometimes she brought small gifts for the little girl, a coloring book, a pastry, or a cute pen. The child loved them, and her father always tried to refuse politely, saying she didn't have to. But she wanted to. One morning it was raining heavily. The cafe was almost empty. She arrived first, soaked despite her umbrella. A few minutes later he came in with his daughter, both laughing as they shook the rain off their coats. When he saw her wet hair, he frowned slightly and offered his scarf. "You'll catch a cold," he said simply. She hesitated, unused to such gestures, then accepted it. "Thank you," he smiled. "See? It's not so hard to let someone help you." She smiled back. "Maybe I'm learning." That day they talked longer than usual. The rain kept falling outside, and for once she didn't check her phone even once. The little girl eventually fell asleep on the seat beside her father, her head resting on his arm. The CEO watched them quietly, her heart full of an emotion she hadn't felt in years. When it was finally time to go, he offered to walk her to her car with his umbrella. She tried to say no, but he insisted gently, and she gave in. They walked side by side through the rain, close enough that their shoulders touched. At her car, she turned to him and said softly, "Thank you. For everything." He looked at her for a moment before replying, "You don't have to thank me. Sometimes it's nice just to have someone to talk to." She nodded slowly, unable to find the right words. He smiled one last time and walked away, his daughter holding his hand tightly. As she sat in her car watching them disappear into the rain, she realized her mornings had changed completely. That small cafe had become more than just a stop for coffee. It had become a place where she felt human again. And even though she didn't want to admit it yet, she knew her heart had started to open, to the man with kind eyes, and to the little girl who made her smile like she hadn't in years. The cafe had slowly become her favorite place. It wasn't just about the coffee anymore. It was about the warmth she felt there, the sound of laughter from a little girl, and the calm presence of the man who seemed to understand her without needing to ask too many questions. Every morning, she found herself looking forward to that small window of peace before her busy day began. Some days he and his daughter would already be there when she arrived. Other days she'd be waiting, pretending to check her phone but secretly hoping they'd walk through the door. And they always did. Their meetings had become a quiet routine that neither of them talked about but both understood. They didn't make plans, yet somehow they always showed up at the same time. The cafe staff started smiling knowingly whenever they came in. Even the barista once joked, "Your usual table?" which made both of them laugh. One morning the cafe was unusually crowded. All the tables were full except one by the corner, barely big enough for two. The father noticed her standing with her coffee in hand and waved her over. "Looks like we'll have to share again," he said with a grin. She smiled and sat down, feeling oddly happy about it. The little girl was busy coloring on her notebook, occasionally asking her father for help. The CEO watched them quietly for a moment, then said, "You're really good with her." He looked up, surprised. "I try my best. She's my world." "I can tell," she said softly. "You're patient. Most people lose that." He shrugged lightly. "Patience is the only thing that works with kids. You can't rush them, can't control them, you just guide them." She nodded, her gaze lowering to her coffee. "That's a good lesson." "I could use that at work," he smiled. "I'm guessing your job doesn't leave much room for patience." "Not much," she admitted. "Everything's about results, speed, numbers. Sometimes I forget there are people behind those numbers." He studied her expression and said gently, "Maybe that's why you come here. To remember." The words hit her quietly. She didn't reply, but he wasn't wrong. In that cafe, she wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a leader or a boss. She was just a person. That morning after they finished their coffee, she offered to drop them off. It had started raining again, and the little girl had forgotten her raincoat. He hesitated at first, but finally agreed. During the short drive, the girl sang a little tune she had learned at school, and the CEO found herself laughing. The sound filled the car like sunlight. When they reached their stop, the man thanked her sincerely. "You really didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said simply. As they stepped out, the little girl turned and waved. "See you tomorrow." The CEO smiled, waving back. "See you tomorrow." And just like that, the word tomorrow began to mean something new to her. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened in small, natural ways. They started sharing tiny moments that felt ordinary but somehow special. Sometimes he would save her favorite pastry before it sold out. Other times she'd bring a small toy or sticker book for the little girl. One morning, when her car battery died outside the cafe, he came to the rescue. She stood by helplessly as he rolled up his sleeves and checked under the hood. "You really don't need to do that," she said, watching him with a mix of amusement and gratitude. He laughed. "It's not a big deal. Besides, you look like someone who's never had to jump-start a car before." "I haven't," she admitted. "My driver usually handles that." He grinned. "Well, consider this a free lesson." When the engine finally started, she clapped her hands in excitement. "You're amazing." He shook his head, smiling. "No, just practical. There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment longer than she meant to. There was something so grounded about him, so real. It made her heart feel steady in a way it hadn't in years. Their friendship wasn't grand or dramatic. It was built quietly through everyday gestures, the kind that didn't need to be spoken aloud. When she smiled, he noticed. When she seemed tired, he didn't ask too many questions, just made sure her coffee was warm and the conversation easy. One day, the little girl invited her to her school's art fair. "You have to come," she said earnestly. "I drew you." The CEO blinked in surprise. "You drew me?" "Yes," the child said proudly. "Daddy says you always smile when you see us, so I wanted to draw that." She laughed, touched. "I'll be there, I promise." That Friday, she actually rearranged her meetings to make it happen. When she arrived, the little girl ran up and hugged her legs. "You came?" "Of course," she said, smiling warmly. The father looked both proud and slightly embarrassed. "She wouldn't stop talking about this," he said with a soft laugh. The art fair was simple. Children's drawings taped along classroom walls, the smell of crayons and glue in the air. But to her it felt perfect. She moved slowly, admiring the little girl's artwork. The drawing of her made her laugh. It was slightly crooked, but full of color and joy. "You're really talented," she told the girl sincerely. "Daddy helps me sometimes," the child said happily. She looked at him. "You draw too?" He shrugged modestly. "A little. Mostly just to keep her company." As they walked through the fair, she noticed how everyone there seemed to know him. The teachers greeted him kindly, and other parents smiled when they saw him. He wasn't rich or powerful, but he had something rare: respect, kindness, and genuine warmth. Later, as they walked out together, the little girl ran ahead, chasing bubbles with her friends. The CEO turned to him and said quietly, "You're doing an amazing job raising her." He looked at her, surprised. "Thank you. Sometimes I feel like I'm just making it up as I go." "Maybe that's what everyone does," she said softly. He smiled, looking at his daughter. "She makes it worth it." The CEO nodded, her heart full. "She's lucky to have you." "And I'm lucky to have her," he said, then glanced at her. "And maybe lucky to have met you too." The words lingered between them. She didn't reply right away. She just smiled, a small, meaningful smile that said more than words could. From that day, things started feeling different. There was a quiet shift she couldn't ignore. She found herself thinking about him even during meetings, smiling when something reminded her of the cafe. She began to realize that what she felt wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something deeper, but she didn't know how to handle it. She was a woman used to control, not emotions. Love or anything close to it scared her. One afternoon, she saw him waiting outside her office building. He had brought his daughter to see the tall glass tower she worked in. "She wanted to see where the lady with coffee works," he explained, smiling shyly. The little girl looked up at the building with wide eyes. "It's so big." The CEO laughed. "You can come inside if you want. I'll give you a tour." They did. She showed them her office, the view from the top floor, the big desk covered in papers. The girl climbed onto her chair and giggled. "You're like a queen up here." The CEO smiled, touched. "A tired queen, maybe." The father laughed. "You're definitely not what I expected when I first saw you." "What did you expect?" she asked playfully. "Someone serious. Cold, maybe. But you're not that at all." She looked at him curiously. "What changed your mind?" He smiled. You smiled back. For a moment, everything felt still. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was smile again, softly, shyly. That day ended with laughter and a promise to meet again at the cafe the next morning. When she got home that night, she sat quietly by the window thinking about everything. The sound of their laughter still echoed in her mind. The little girl's voice, his gentle eyes, it all felt too beautiful to be just coincidence. She realized then that some connections didn't need to be planned or explained. They just happened, like pieces of a puzzle finding their place. The woman who once thought love was a distraction was now finding peace in it. And though she hadn't said it out loud, she knew her heart was slowly falling for the man who had shown her that life could be simple, kind and full of meaning, even without power or luxury. And as she drifted to sleep that night, she smiled thinking about how one spilled cup of hot chocolate had changed everything. It had been months since that rainy morning at the cafe when he had offered her his umbrella. Since then, their friendship had quietly grown into something deep, something that neither of them had planned but both had come to value. She, the woman who once ruled her world with strict routines and unshakable confidence, now found herself looking forward to ordinary moments, like sharing breakfast with a small child who loved strawberry muffins, or listening to a man who spoke with kindness instead of judgment. One evening, she invited both of them to her company's charity event. It was a formal dinner, the kind filled with polished suits, long speeches, and the subtle competition of powerful people trying to impress one another. She wasn't sure if it was the right idea, but something inside her wanted to share that part of her life with them. She wanted them to see where she spent her days, what kind of world she managed every single hour. When they arrived, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: nervousness. The little girl looked adorable in her tiny floral dress, holding her father's hand tightly. He looked simple yet confident in his plain shirt and dark jacket. People stared when they walked in together, and whispers began almost immediately. Her assistants were shocked. They had never seen their boss with anyone who wasn't part of the business world, but the CEO didn't care this time. For the first time, she felt proud of who she had beside her. She laughed openly as the little girl pointed at the dessert table, whispering that she wanted the biggest slice of cake. She caught herself smiling every time she looked at them. Her smile wasn't polished or planned. It was real. Later that night, while everyone mingled and made small talk about profits and investments, she found herself standing beside him near the balcony. The city lights shimmered below like tiny stars scattered on the ground. She took a deep breath and said softly, "You know, I've been to hundreds of these events, but this is the first time I don't feel like pretending." He looked at her and smiled. "Maybe you were never pretending. Maybe you were just tired of being strong all the time." That sentence hit her harder than she expected. For years, she had been seen as strong, fearless, even intimidating, but she wasn't sure if anyone had ever realized how lonely it could be at the top. She had spent her life building her name, proving herself in a world that didn't easily accept women in power. But success had come with a price: missed dinners, broken friendships, and quiet nights spent with nothing but her laptop and a city view. His words stayed with her long after the event ended. She kept replaying them in her head, especially when she was alone. He saw her differently, not as the CEO who signed contracts or led meetings, but as a person. The following weeks brought small but meaningful moments. They met for coffee whenever they could, sometimes talking about nothing important at all. The little girl had grown attached to her and started calling her the lady with shiny shoes. They would sit by the cafe window talking about school projects and favorite colors. It was simple, yet it warmed her heart in ways she hadn't known possible. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, things at her company began to shift. Rumors started spreading. Some employees began whispering that she was getting too distracted. One tabloid website even posted a blurry picture of her at the cafe, holding a cup of coffee and smiling at the single dad. The headline twisted the story into something it wasn't. At first, she ignored it. She was used to people talking, but then one of her board members brought it up during a meeting, his tone casual but his words cutting. "You've built this company with a professional image," he said. "You wouldn't want something personal to damage that, would you?" That night, she sat in her office long after everyone had left. She looked at the city lights again, but this time they didn't feel beautiful. They felt cold. For the first time in months, she wondered if her happiness was something she had to give up again. The next morning, she sent a message to him, saying she was busy for the week and couldn't meet. She told herself it was temporary. She needed to focus. But deep down, she was scared, not of losing him, but of the world's judgment. Days turned into weeks. Their morning coffees stopped. The cafe felt emptier each time she passed by it. The silence grew heavy. He didn't pressure her. He respected her space, but his absence made her realize how much she had come to rely on his quiet presence. One evening, after another long day, she found herself walking past the cafe again. She paused outside and saw him sitting with his daughter, laughing at something she said. The sight made her heart ache. He looked up and noticed her through the window. Their eyes met.
He didn't move, and neither did she.
But there was a softness in his gaze, a silent question. Why had she pulled away? She walked in slowly, unsure what to say. The little girl ran up to her, excited, and said, "We thought you forgot us." That simple sentence broke her composure. She smiled weakly and knelt to hug the child, whispering, "I could never forget you." When the girl went back to her seat, he looked at her and said gently, "You've been quiet." She hesitated before answering. "People started talking. About us, about me. I didn't want it to affect you or your daughter." He nodded, his expression calm. "You don't have to protect me. I'm not afraid of what people say. The only thing that matters is what's true between us." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Without fear, without hesitation. He wasn't trying to control her or fix her. He simply saw her. And that was enough to make her heart tremble. The cafe was quiet except for the faint sound of the coffee machine. She looked down at her hands, realizing how foolish she had been to think she could separate her heart from her life. She had spent years mastering control, but love had its own way of breaking rules. She finally whispered, "I've always been scared of losing control. I thought I had to choose between being strong and being human." He smiled softly. "Maybe being strong is just learning to be human without fear." Those words stayed with her. When she went home that night, she stood by the window again. But this time the city didn't look so lonely. She realized that for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't afraid of being seen. Not as a CEO, not as a leader, but as a woman with a heart that could still feel deeply. From that day on, she stopped caring about what people thought. She went back to the cafe the next morning earlier than usual and waited for them. When they arrived, the little girl waved and ran to her. He followed behind, smiling quietly. They sat together as the sun came up and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. She told him about the meeting, about the pressure, and about how scared she had been. He listened just as he always did, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished, he simply said, "You've carried the world for too long. Let someone carry you for a change." It was in that simple moment that she realized something profound. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes, it comes softly, through conversations, laughter, and the quiet understanding between two people who see the world differently but choose to walk it together. That morning, as they walked out of the cafe, the city felt warmer. The world hadn't changed, but she had. She no longer felt like the woman who had to prove herself to everyone. She was just herself, real, vulnerable, and free. And when he took her hand as they crossed the street, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like peace. The mornings at the cafe had started to feel like a quiet ritual, something she looked forward to more than she had expected. It wasn't just coffee or breakfast anymore. It was the presence of the little girl with her innocent laughter, and the man whose calm confidence had begun to feel like a kind of anchor in her otherwise busy life. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the routine had grown into something real, something that touched the deepest parts of her heart. One weekend, he invited her and his daughter to spend a day at the park. She wasn't sure how to react at first. Parks weren't part of her usual weekend plans. Her weekends were usually for meetings, calls, or catching up on work she didn't finish during the week. But she said yes, and that yes would mark a turning point in her life. The morning was crisp, the sunlight soft and golden, the kind that made everything feel calm. They arrived, and she watched as the little girl ran ahead, skipping and laughing at butterflies that danced near the flowers. Her laughter was infectious, and soon she found herself smiling freely, forgetting all the stress of board meetings and reports. "Come on," the girl shouted, tugging at her hand. You have to try the swings. She laughed, surprised at her own willingness to let go. They went to the swings and she pushed the little girl gently, laughing as she squealed. The man stood nearby, watching them with a smile, his eyes reflecting a quiet happiness. There was no pretense, no competition, just the pure joy of shared moments. After a while, they sat on a bench, sharing sandwiches and juice. The little girl leaned against her father while talking animatedly about school and her favorite books. She listened, laughing at small details and asking questions, genuinely interested. The simple act of being part of their life made her heart feel something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. At one point, the little girl ran ahead to climb a small hill. She turned to her father and said, "You should try it too." He laughed softly. "I think someone else might be more adventurous." Her gaze turned to him. "I can be adventurous too," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. She felt a sudden urge to do something she hadn't done in years, to let herself be carefree, to not think about responsibilities for a few moments. She ran after the little girl, climbing the small hill, and when she reached the top, the view took her breath away. The city stretched out below, buildings glowing in the afternoon sun, and the park spread out like a green blanket around them. The little girl cheered, and she felt the same lightness she used to feel as a child, before ambition and responsibility had crowded out simple joys. Her father climbed up beside them, and they stood together quietly, taking in the view. For a moment, no one spoke. Words weren't needed. The moment itself said everything. It was trust, it was acceptance, it was the unspoken understanding that life could be full of beauty if one let it in. Later that evening, they returned to her apartment. The little girl wanted to play with her collection of building blocks, and she found herself kneeling on the floor, helping the child build towers that kept toppling over. She laughed louder than she had in months, genuinely enjoying the simplicity of the moment. Her apartment, usually so silent and filled with work-related noise, felt alive in a way it hadn't before. After the little girl went to bed, he stayed behind, sitting on the sofa, quietly watching her. She noticed the way he looked at her, not with judgment or expectation, but with understanding and warmth. "You're different than I imagined," he said softly. "How do you mean?" she asked, curious. "You're strong, yes, but you're also human, you care. You laugh, you let people in, even if just a little." She looked down, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "I don't usually let people in." "I know," he said gently, "and I don't expect you to, but I hope you'll let me." The words felt heavy, but not in a bad way. Heavy in the sense that they carried truth, a truth she couldn't ignore anymore. She realized then that her walls, built over decades, were slowly crumbling, not because he had forced his way in, but because he had shown her that love could exist quietly, gently, without pressure or drama. Days turned into weeks, and their connection became stronger. They met at the cafe more often, sometimes for breakfast, sometimes just for a cup of tea. She even started leaving her phone in her bag, something she rarely did, so she could fully focus on the moments with them. One morning, the little girl handed her a drawing. It was simple, 3 stick figures holding hands with a bright sun overhead. Below it, the girl had written, "Family is happiness." She looked at him, feeling a lump in her throat. "She's really sweet," she said softly. He nodded, his eyes warm. "She means it. Happiness is what matters most." The CEO stared at the drawing, then at them, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Hope. Real hope. The kind that made her feel like life wasn't just about work or achievements, but about moments that mattered, about people who mattered. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, he came to her apartment with the little girl. They had planned a quiet movie night. The little girl picked a blanket and snuggled between them on the sofa, and for the first time she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known she was missing. "Do you think this can last?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. He turned to her, taking her hand gently. "I don't know about the future," he said softly, "but I know that right now this feels right. And sometimes that's enough to start." The words made her heart swell. She realized that love didn't have to be perfect or planned. It just had to be real. Weeks later, they took a quiet weekend trip together, just the 3 of them. They went to a small lake town, where the air smelled of pine and the water reflected the clear sky. They fished, walked along the shore, and even tried kayaking. Every moment was filled with laughter, small adventures, and the kind of closeness that didn't need explanation. One night, sitting by a campfire with the little girl asleep nearby, he turned to her. "You know, I never thought someone like you would fit into our little world." She smiled, leaning back against the warm glow of the fire. "I didn't think I'd want to. But you do," he said simply. She laughed softly. "Yes, I do." It was the first time she admitted it, even to herself. She wanted to be part of their lives, not just as a guest, but as someone who belonged. Returning home, they continued their mornings at the cafe, small adventures and quiet evenings. They didn't need grand gestures to feel close. A smile, a shared pastry, a gentle touch, or a warm hug was enough. The little girl's laughter was like music in her ears, and the father's quiet strength gave her a sense of peace she hadn't known she could feel. One evening, as they walked together under the city lights, the little girl holding both of their hands, she felt something settle inside her. She didn't need to rush, she didn't need to plan, and she didn't need to fear judgment. She had found something rare, someone who loved life simply, a child who reminded her of joy, and a place in her own heart for both of them. "Thank you," she whispered to him quietly, as they watched the little girl spin around with laughter. "For what?" he asked, glancing at her. "For showing me that love can be quiet, gentle, and real, that it doesn't need to shout to exist." He smiled softly. "It doesn't, you just have to let it in." And in that moment she did, months later. The little girl started calling her Mommy, softly at first, and then with the kind of innocent certainty only a child could have. It wasn't demanded or forced, it was natural, a reflection of how much she had become part of their lives. Her heart ached with happiness every time she heard it. The CEO realized then that life had changed her, not through grand success or public admiration, but through ordinary moments filled with honesty, kindness, and laughter. She had met a single father and his daughter in a small cafe one rainy morning, and they had opened her heart in ways she never thought possible. The woman who once chased achievement and control had found something far more precious: love that didn't judge, moments that didn't demand, and a family that had chosen her just as much as she had chosen them. One quiet evening, they all sat together by the window, the city lights twinkling below, sipping cocoa, sharing stories, and laughing over little things. She watched the man speak to his daughter, the way he guided her gently without ever raising his voice, and she realized that the heart could find peace even in a chaotic world. She reached out and held his hand. "I'm glad we met," she whispered. He looked at her and smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Me too." And in that simple exchange, there was a promise, not of grand gestures or perfect days, but of life shared, moments treasured, and love that felt like coming home. The spilled cup of hot chocolate at the cafe had started it all, but it had grown into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. It had turned ordinary mornings into cherished memories, quiet smiles into laughter-filled days, and strangers into a family. She had found happiness, not in power or achievement, but in connection. She had found love not in grand declarations, but in quiet understanding. And she had found a family not by planning it, but by opening her heart and letting life happen naturally. The little girl curled up beside them, the man beside her, and she felt a warmth she knew would never fade. For the first time in her life, she felt truly complete. The cafe, the coffee, the laughter, they had all led her here. And she knew that no matter what happened in the world beyond, this simple, genuine life she had found was exactly where she was meant to be.